the first instinct is to get loud.
Mm-hmm.
And it is even for myself, unfortunately, and it's a work in progress.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. Hey everyone, so my guest today is Ignacio. Hi Ignacio, thank
Hello,
you so
everyone.
much for joining and being a guest on our show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, so for anybody who doesn't know you, can you introduce yourself for me?
Yes, Ignacio Corona. I am a husband and a father to two beautiful young daughters, Zoe and Mila, aged 9 and 6. I'm the rare San Diego native.
Okay. Yes.
That's the basics.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited to hear your story and your recipe that you're sharing with us. So tell me what recipe we're going to be doing today and tell me why you chose this one.
So it's a hybrid ceviche / shrimp cocktail. And I say that because with ceviche, you typically cook the shrimp 24 hours in advance in lime and lemon juice.
Okay.
And that's just very difficult for myself personally. So I kind of do a little cheat code and cook the shrimp and then add it. And then it's hybrid in the way of shrimp cocktail because of the shrimp, but also typically with shrimp cocktail, you have a tomato-based or a clam-based juice that's added. And lately we just haven't been eating it that way, but you can eat it. It's very versatile.
Awesome. And so why did you choose this particular recipe?
It reminds me of growing up. Very religious Catholic home. So during Lent, we wouldn't be able to eat meat on Fridays.
Okay.
So it was a staple dish for that time.
Very cool. Well, I'm so excited. I have never had your, ceviche-ish recipe before, so I'm super excited to try it. Can you tell me, what are the first couple of steps that I need to do, and I'll get doing those while we're chatting?
Yeah. So typically, I start with the onions.
Okay.
And then I bathe them in the lemon and lime juice.
Okay.
Because the onion is very strong. I personally don't like that strength in the onion, so I let it kind of cook, if you will, in the lemon and lime juice.
Gotcha. So I can squeeze all of these and then put my onions in?
Exactly.
Perfect. I can do that. All right. So while I'm doing this, so one of the reasons why I invited you on here is because you have a very unique take on some of the missions that you've kind of set out for yourself with raising two daughters and kind of the role that you wanted to have in their lives and what you wanted to demonstrate in their lives that I thought was very unique. I don't hear it too often. You are, as you mentioned, the spouse of my good friend Amanda, yes, who is one of the most ambitious people I have ever met. And I have absolutely loved the way that you have been such a supporter. And when we've chatted before in the past, you've mentioned that is such a priority for you because of your daughters. Yes. And so I'd really love to know a little bit more about your journey and kind of how you came to that decision and why was it so important to you to be able to kind of do these things?
Yeah, so Amanda is very ambitious, like you said, and I love it. I live vicariously through her studies. I feel like I was there when she did her master's program, when she did her doctoral program, and she would bounce stuff back to me. So it really was like we were doing it together. And I love that she included me in it. Mm-hmm. And for my daughters, it was great for them to see how it's done. And a prime example of what success in education looks like.
Okay.
But yes, I would never hinder or try to say, well, you shouldn't do this or that. If she wanted to do it, she was going to put it in the work. Mm-hmm. We will figure out how to balance the day-to-day life activities, right?
Yeah.
So like I said, I lived vicariously through her.
And can you tell me a little bit more? Because I hear you mentioning like that it was so important to you to kind of sit down and go, if this is something you want to do, let's make it happen. Let's figure out kind of a plan to do it.
Yeah.
Why was that such an important narrative for you to be able to do?
Well, not only would it possibly better our lives from a career standpoint, but again, that example to the girls that this is important, and if it's something you set your mind to, it's worth achieving, and the back end stuff we'll figure out.
Okay.
Yeah, and Amanda would tell me that this was a dream of hers. This is what she really always really wanted. Right then, I knew we're gonna make it work.
Yeah. And so I'm super curious to kind of know, was that different from maybe the family archetypes that you grew up seeing? Because you grew up in a very maybe different culture than, you know, what you would typically think of when we think of male and female, kind of who's out there doing the stuff, if you will.
Right.
Is that an accurate statement? Am I way off base?
No, 100% accurate. I grew up in a very traditional gender role. The male, alpha male. You know, my father worked 6 days a week for 45 years in the same restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And he brought home the bacon, and he literally brought home bacon from the restaurant unused that day, or I don't know why, but yes, we had bacon pretty much every other day in the household.
Yeah.
Available to us.
I mean, not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing. And my mother also worked full time, did all the cooking, did all the cleaning, did all the laundry, but I don't think I subscribed to that dynamic because of her. Because while her dynamic was the traditional route, I'm the youngest of 4 boys, and between my age gap to the next older brother is 5 years. So I really was stuck to the hip to my mom in those first years, right? And I saw how much she worked. But whether she did it consciously or subconsciously, she was planting some seeds of how to cook. We were making our own eggs at 5. Like, if you wanted a certain way, you do it. So those values were instilled in us early on. She's very financial savvy. So she was planting those seeds early on. Save your money. Do not, like, the goal should be a home. And that's not always everyone's goal, but that was our goal.
Yeah.
So she would plant those seeds that maybe a typical gender role, the male is really in charge of all the financial decisions. And if it comes from him, it's worth gold. But she really did. There was nothing she couldn't do. And I really took that, and I feel we're applying it in our family, in our dynamic.
Yeah. Now, was that narrative that a woman could do it, and so then you were seeing that? Is that kind of what you mean?
That's exactly what it is. And
wow.
Me being a girl dad, having 2 daughters, I want that for them. I want to teach them that to be strong, independent women. They don't need a man in their lives. If they want a man or a significant partner in their lives, by all means, but you don't need it. You won't need it. And that's what I'm trying to instill.
Why? Can you tell me about why that is so important to you, for them to be able to walk away and have that message kind of really internally built in?
Because I feel that they'd be set up for success. I feel that they're going to really focus on being happy. They'll be able to focus on being happy without a dependency on anything or anybody. Okay.
Do you feel like that's not traditional in kind of your culture, the way that maybe even you saw others outside of your home?
100%. I think the older generation, if you will, did take a lot more before they were fed up. And it was because possibly their dependency on the other individual, whether it be financials or another thing I just through this process reflected on is a lot of the men were the only drivers in the family. The female, my mom does not drive.
Okay.
So another kind of dependency there that, I mean, kind of goes overlooked a little bit. So just a few things that add up to their dependency, which is what I kind of want to make sure the girls don't have.
Yeah. And it sounds like you really would like them to know that they are capable of self-sufficiency in that and kind of being able to choose and not have it chosen for them, it sounds
Correct.
like.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. And so I'm really curious, like, was this something that you've received any pushback for? I mean, the fact that, you kind of took that back seat and were maybe the primary caregiver while Amanda was out kind of doing her graduate program, doing her doctoral program. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, one of the biggest just chores, if you will, is in the kitchen, making sure the kids are fed and nurtured and all that. And I feel that piece of the pie is down my alley. I feel very comfortable in the kitchen. I feel very comfortable making sure that they have what they need for the kids. And the other portion that I work on a daily basis is that communication piece, right, with the kids. And it's a work in progress. We're always working on how do I convey a message when they're not doing something when they're doing something they probably shouldn't be. How do I convey the message so that they receive it and not resist it? So that's a daily focus of mine. But all the other things, the making sure that they're bathed, they're fed, they're make it to school on time, all that, that's pretty simple.
Do you think that for you, there's ever been maybe a struggle or hesitation in the fact that, like you said, it isn't maybe a traditional quote unquote male role, that it's, very different than like the machismo kind of narrative?
Yeah, no, definitely. Growing up, I didn't see really the male figure in my life have those difficult conversations with us. It just wasn't something that we said.
Yeah.
Or was said to us. We didn't really share our feelings too much. If we didn't really ask for help either, because I mean, it just wasn't really prompted. Do you need help that often?
Yeah.
So it was a wake up call in that. All right, now I have these two little ones that are dependent on me to teach them the way, right? So it's also teaching myself the way, or taking the lead from Amanda, because she does a great job of articulating conversation with the girls. So it's I never am not learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you feel like there were moments in there, because I hear you mentioning like a very intentional kind of learning curve, and that you kind of faced it and said, okay, how can I learn from this? Did you ever feel less than at any point because you were, or taking on these roles that weren't men's roles, if you will?
I don't know about less than, but I really didn't care what anyone else really thought if they saw me doing the stuff that maybe a female gender would do typically.
Yeah.
I learned it from my mother. Like, she did pretty much everything, and I think my both parents set us up for success. And that's all I want to do with my kids, is get them to a point where they can be successful, and the rest is up to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so awesome that you were able to do that. And even to kind of have that mindset of, I don't really care if you agree with what I'm doing or not. This is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's such a narrative that I feel like so many people want, but have a hard time getting to. There's, whether it's a lack of confidence or maybe even a lack of that role model to be able to kind of show them, hey, it's okay. I'm so curious, like for you, how were you able to kind of get that confidence that it doesn't matter?
It really was all I do, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's the only option I have.
Hmm.
It's a good option, I feel, and I went with it.
Yeah. You mentioned it's the only option you have. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mean, my father was definitely part of our lives. He was always there, but he did take a back step to the nurturing aspect of our growing up.
Okay.
My mother did take the lead in sort of teaching us the way, if you will. And it's more, they did the best with what they knew, basically, is how I would describe it.
Okay.
And so, also being the youngest, I was very attached to my mother and really saw everything she put into the family. And I really took that in. And I know it was a good move. I know she did a great job. So I really wanted to mirror that, if you will.
Okay. Were there particular pieces, kind of like you said, that for you stand out as really big? Like, because I hear you mentioning, there's really no other option. It sounds like you had this conviction of like, I want it to look something similar. I want to take these. Was there a particular like aha moment for you that you remember of like, yeah, I don't want this. I do want, this new narrative that I'm making for myself.
Yeah. There was, and it was an article I read, and it had to do with when we talk to our children or reprimand them or tell them that they're doing something wrong.
Okay.
And it may be something insignificant, something small, like not finishing all their food on their plate or making a mess while they were playing. We're projecting what our childhood was like.
Okay.
We're projecting what our parents were getting mad at us for. And sometimes children need to be children. And I'm really trying to be selective when I do tell them, okay, you shouldn't be doing this. And the way I tell them is it, and I know the answer, like this is the right answer, but applying it is a day-to-day challenge.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to take a pause. What am I doing next?
Okay, so we did the
bathing.
Yes, the onions are bathing. Now it really is up to you on what you want to throw in next. Okay. I'm usually, so we're going to be doing one with jalapeno and one without, correct?
Yes, please. So y'all know wimpy when it comes to spicy.
No problem. So half of this will be for non-jalapeno and half will be with jalapeno. And then it's basically add all the other ingredients.
Okay.
The shrimp we can do last, which we could cut in half, and it's just mixing it together at that point.
Cool.
Well, I will say one thing that you don't typically find in ceviche is carrots. Yeah. And that is because of my mom throws carrots in everything.
Okay.
Everything. And we love it. It adds a little crunch factor too. But I've explained this to others and they're like, whoa, carrots and
they're raw carrots. They're not even
cooked. Yeah. So yeah. It's just something I picked up from her and she uses it in everything you can imagine.
Okay.
Good for the eyes.
There you go. But again, I mean, I think the common theme I'm hearing from so many parents anyway is that we can kind of give them those veggies, right?
Yeah.
So that's what you got to do. So I imagine, I can only imagine your mom going, let me find any way to kind of put some of those veggies in. Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense. Exactly. Okay. So I'll do a little bit half and half of everything except for the jalapenos. It'll go all in this big one. And then I have my own personal bowl for my wimpy. All right. So I can do that. And I'd love to know a little bit more. I heard you mention, especially a piece about kind of being really mindful about some of the discipline that you're doing with the girls in the fact of taking into consideration their age and kind of what's age appropriate, as well as I heard you mention kind of letting them and having compassion for the fact that they are kids.
Yes.
And so that I feel like is such a different turn from maybe kind of, I'm not in the Hispanic culture, but I know the Filipino culture is very different. Like my mental wellness was not at the forefront of like the raising, if you will. And I feel like I hear that a lot from some of my Latina, families. And so I'd really love to kind of hear that decision process and maybe how that is that different from how you were kind of?
Yes. The first instinct is to get loud.
Mm-hmm.
And it is even for myself, unfortunately, and it's a work in progress, 100%.
Yeah.
It's probably because we didn't know how to express ourselves in a way with words, basically. Like, so you just get loud, and hopefully that is the way they're going to understand, which is not helpful. It does not help. But yes, growing up, it was, you're going to listen to me and it's going to be this way, and I'm going to get louder and louder and louder.
Yeah.
So that is imprinted. But through conversation, through seeing Amanda's lead, through learning more and more, it is a conversation with the kids as well, with feedback.
Okay. Like, what do you mean by that, with feedback?
So they're doing something that maybe they shouldn't be doing. Put it on them to sort of narrate what's going on.
Okay.
For them to come up with the answer of why something is not right, and let them come up with those answers. But too many times the first thought is, don't do that, and listen to what I'm saying without any explanation. So that is 100% the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life.
Yeah.
And it's still a work in progress.
And you kind of just said my next question, which was that a really difficult narrative and habit to kind of break, especially because I heard you mention like it's almost instinctual.
Yes, very much so. And I haven't broken it, to be honest. It's every day a work in progress of, okay, I see what they're doing. Let's not react right away.
Okay.
I need to think about it before I'm going to even say how I want to say this.
Yeah.
And brutally honest, there is still some yelling at times, and I need to reflect on that when it happens.
Well, I think what you bring up is a really great point, because so many times there's two things. One, that we can be really our worst critics, right? And be really harsh and oh gosh, we use the word should quite a bit, I feel like. And there's that aspect of being able to show ourselves like some compassion and grace for the fact that we are human.
Yes.
And we do mess up. And let's figure out kind of moving forward. At the same time, kind of also using that, it sounds like, and being able to normalize when our kids aren't perfect 100% of the time, that, hey, like if we as adults who have years on these kids, are struggling, like you said, and have to kind of, I need to work this through my head first. Kind of being able to normalize that, hey, when they mess up too, that's a pretty just human thing.
Right. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Do you find that kind of you've gone to making some of those like repair attempts when maybe you aren't showing up as the parent that maybe you're intending to, or what does that look like for you?
It's a conversation with Amanda, honestly, that we both have of, hey, this is kind of what happened. I feel a little bad about it, or whatever the case is.
Okay.
Kind of a playback between us, and then possibly playback with the kids, because they should be hearing what we think as well. Like, hey, you know what? I was wrong in saying this loudly to you. And then explaining why, the reason they shouldn't have been doing what they were doing, or whatever the case is. But and that doesn't always happen, trust me. But if the more we do it, I think the more we would stop and think before we react.
Mm. Is that difficult for you to come back to the kiddos even and say, hey, I messed up?
Very hard.
Yeah.
Very hard. That did not happen growing up.
I was just about to ask. I was like, I feel like I would, if my parents were to ever come back and like apologize to me, like my jaw would hit the ground.
Yeah.
So was it like a similar?
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It still is. It's just one of those things that just never happened.
So what allows you maybe that humility to kind of come back and say, hey, I screwed up?
I'll give a good example. So the communication in our family dynamic, Amanda and I and the kids, is getting better and better as we grow older. But even when I was first dating Amanda, our family didn't show affection, right? We never said "I love yous."
Okay.
And a funny story with Amanda, when we were first dating, it was our first Christmas, and I got her a gift that she kind of had hinted when we were in the mall, and it was $300 Burberry boots, rain boots.
Okay.
And she opens it up and says, "Oh my God, I love you." And this is after a couple months of dating, and I freaked out.
Yeah.
I'm sure my face showed it, and I said, "In my family, we don't say that."
Oh my goodness! You said that to her?
Yes. And she looked at me like, I didn't tell you I love you. It was, to her, it was a more meaningful thank you.
Okay.
Even though she did say the words,
it
was like, oh my God, I love you. Well, you bought me $300 boots. Of course I'm gonna, thank you's not enough.
Right.
So it kind of shows you the mindset that I had early on in the relationship of not expressing yourself, not communicating. Yes, I know my parents loved me, but I mean, I think it is important to hear the words.
Yeah.
And so the communication piece I didn't have in this relationship early on. And I've learned through the kids and through my wife to over communicate, right? So fun fact, my parents now say it to all their grandchildren and us.
Really?
But it's still weird. I can
it feels weird?
It feels weird to hear from them, but I can say it easily to my children and to my wife.
Okay.
But when I hear it from them, it's just kind of, oh, well, where'd this come from?
Yeah.
But they say it now all the time.
Okay. What do you think was the change for them?
The grandchildren.
Really?
The grandchildren, that's when they started saying it.
What do you think it is about grandchildren that kind of, I mean, because that's a pretty big thing to go for, you know, how many years before you heard it?
Yeah, 28.
Okay. So 28 years of really never it being something you said, so much so that you would tell this new lover, right? Like, no, we don't say that. You know, I mean, that's a pretty big shift.
Yeah. The power of grandchildren, power of these little kids, just looking at them probably and saying, you know, Nana, Nino, can I have a hug, or, you know, whatever. It's powerful.
Yeah. Do you think that, because I heard you mention, you know, it is something that they need to hear.
Yeah.
As far as you kind of, it sounds like making that intention of telling that to your kiddos. Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of that mindset shift? Why is it that you feel now that it's something they need to hear?
Well, we just don't know the future, right? So anything can happen at any point.
Yeah.
So it's just important for them to know, even though you may show it. And again, my parents showed it every day. But I do think it's important to hear as well.
How did you, for any of our listeners, because I imagine you're not the first person where kind of I love you is not a normal thing in the home. I know that I've heard it from dozens of families that I've worked with. So for you, I'm super curious, like, how did you rewrite that narrative for yourself?
Simply, my wife, she made it a staple in the home to make sure that she knows to say it to me and
Mm.
our kids. And it was very important. It is very important in her family to make sure that her siblings, her mom, her dad, everyone knows that she loves them.
Hmm.
And it really did come from that side.
Wow. So I'm curious, kind of, are there any other pieces that you're looking at? And because it sounds like you've made quite a bit of shifts within your own family that were very different than, really kind of breaking it, sounds like generational patterns.
Yeah. It I I feel you need to be flexible. You need to be open to learning new ways. Just because it was done before, it doesn't mean it's the best way.
Hmm.
So taking the good out of the old generation and maybe the new generation and creating sort of balance act, not being rigid,
Okay.
being flexible and open to new ways.
Yeah. When you say kind of rigid, can you say like a little bit more like for you, how does that play out? What does that look like?
The gender roles, I would go back to the gender roles of no, this is how we do it.
Mm,
As males, you need to follow these. You are always in charge of these things. It's not the case. It
yeah.
really isn't, especially in today's world. Like I subscribe to the 50-50 partnership for all decisions, for all aspects, whether they're financial decisions, home, life, chores, or anything like that. It's a conversation with the men and I on, I think this is the best decision. What do you think? And let's come to an agreement or compromise or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. It sounds like by having and modeling even that, like you said, that 50-50, I wonder too if the effects that will have with the girls of really showing them firsthand that, they deserve kind of a voice in their relationships,
Yeah.
it sounds like.
Yes, and it goes back to um, letting them know that hey, yeah, mom makes these decisions with dad,
Hmm.
not opposite of dad or vice versa. It's a conversation, and it's important for them to see that because they will in their relationships in the future, they won't be afraid to say something.
Hmm. What do you mean by that?
So if it's something they don't agree with, I feel like they would bring it up uh, instead of just going with the flow, I guess,
Okay.
because
It,
it's a conversation.
yeah. Is that something that you feel kind of might have been previous messages? Because, we're talking about breaking some of those generational
Yes,
patterns. Is that kind of very typical from what you've seen?
yes, 100%. A lot of again, the alpha male. My father was. It was his decision ultimately at the
Mm,
end. How it got there varied, but it was his decision. But what my mother did do is sort of plant some seeds or little crumbs to help allow him to get to a certain decision. So she
okay.
was very, very smart in that regard. And one example is for the longest they were renters. We
Okay.
were renters, and it was my mother and her financial savvy and her persistence that got him to realize that we can buy a home, we can afford it.
Mm,
Um, we just need to keep trying. And I feel she would let him know the benefits and let him know uh, why it's so important to have a place of our own.
hmm.
And he did finally come to that decision of okay, let's do it. I think his hesitation may have been um, the rejection from maybe a bank, and why even go through that?
Mm,
Let's just we're happy, we're fine.
okay.
But it was her persistence and not leaving it alone and letting him come to the realization that it's important, and letting him make the decision that yes, it's going to need my signature to get this house.
Yeah.
So it really was his decision, but she really was the catalyst.
And I think you're so on point. I feel like I've heard this from a lot of different cultures where it is kind of, you know, in order for the female, the female presenting kind of genders to kind of do it almost secretive, like behind the scenes, being able to get a say in things, versus like it sounds like what you've really tried to model for your kids today is that it's very much kind of ever present in your face. Hey, these are decisions we're making together. It's not a one-sided thing.
Correct. Yes. I feel that's really important for the girls to see, so that they feel they will have a say, or at least they feel that they should have a say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm super curious. I heard you mention kind of this idea where, you know, that your mom was kind of saying, hey, we could do this, and that potentially your dad was saying no because of that fear of rejection. And I feel like that's such a big thing I hear from so many people. There's so many things that maybe we let that fear kind of really drive us and really stop us from maybe doing some of these things where, you know, it sounds like your mom was saying, hey, no, financially, like we can do this. Yes. It might take some creativity, yes. Right? It might take some saving,
yes.
But that this is a possibility, but have kind of some of that narrative that's there that's saying, you know, well, if the bank says no, that's
fine, we can go find another bank.
Like, yeah.
They did get a couple no's, to be honest, and they kept going.
Do you feel like that's something kind of just with your father as far as some of the fear, or is that something that's you've seen a lot kind of in your culture and your family dynamic?
I definitely see a lot in my culture where it's just, well, I mean, just think about what they had to do. They immigrated from Mexico in a foreign country and try to create a better life. Like, that's scary in itself.
Yeah, 100%.
So we're here, my 3 brothers and myself, we have a better life because of their hard work. And my father, I distinctly remember this conversation, and he said, I'm not going to be able to teach you many things in this world, but I will teach you how to work hard. You will have my work ethic, and I 100% do.
Wow.
So that is 100% what he brought to the table, and no one can take that away from him. But yes, I can't imagine what he had to endure to get us to this point.
Yeah. And I mean, to be able, like you said, to kind of overcome that, you know, it can be really easy. Then I'm here, I've made all these strides to kind of just, let's not draw attention to ourselves.
Exactly.
I feel like I hear that from a lot of the immigrant families. Yes. Absolutely. And so I'm so just blown away by the fact that not only have you taken that and been able to like go forth, but go forth in putting a stop, it sounds like, to so many of those maybe passed down ideas that were a little bit more rigid.
Yes, agreed that we had it easy. Definitely, we had it easy. If you really think about what their struggle was, and I've heard stories. They've never really given us the full picture, if you will, because I'm sure protecting us, but they've definitely done their part.
Yeah, and I hear you saying, you know, easing comparison, but I think that's one of the things I know that I'm learning is just like everybody's easy, everybody's hard looks a little bit different. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's something that maybe an immigrant family, you know, has in common, but even their, you know, somebody else's family story is probably a little bit different. And you know, I feel like there's so many different with each of the generations, frankly, that, you know, you've got your own versions of hard and what that looks like. And so I'm curious, kind of as we're wrapping up, like, is there anything that now looking at some of the strides that you have made to be able to make a change, and to make a change for a very motivated reason for your daughters. Is there anything that you would, if you had kind of Back to the Future, DeLorean time machine, would you go back and tell yourself anything to kind of prep, or tell anybody else that maybe is struggling with a similar idea of breaking those patterns?
Yes. Stop blaming your parents for your shortcomings,
Hmm.
and what are you as an adult doing to better yourself?
Okay.
Um, and I know now what they were able to bring to the table, what they had to deal with,
Hmm.
and it's now up to me to fix or to better myself. So yeah, they did their job. Is what I would tell myself.
Mm.
Now it's time to work on yourself.
Yeah. And what I think is so interesting about what you said is that it almost sounds like kind of taking that ownership and that responsibility for your own self growth as well,
Right.
versus maybe throwing your hands up and saying, well, I don't know anything different. This is all I know.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Exactly. There comes a point where you got to take responsibility
Mm.
for who you are, right?
Yeah.
And I'm working on that as we speak.
Right.
So it's nothing that is gonna change overnight,
Hmm.
but it's a work in progress.
Are there any kind of resources for that you found that have been super helpful that would be good for our listeners to hear, as far as being able to make some of these changes and maybe have the confidence to do them?
Resources.
Or even that for you, like, how did you find that support? Or do you have that support?
I do have that support in my wife. I would say probably learning through example.
Hmm.
We have daily conversations on how the day went and what do we think we did good. What do we think we could improve?
Yeah.
Um, and again, it's an ongoing daily challenge.
Hmm.
It's talking to someone basically is what it comes down to. Having that communication
Yeah.
is what I would say. Over communicate if you have to. Um,
When you say over communicate, can you tell me, like, what do you mean by that?
I mean by going into the details of what happened and why it happened, and if this didn't happen, would it be different? Or if you said this, would it be different? Like really over communicating the scenario, I guess, until
Okay.
you feel comfortable speaking in general, or high level conversations with your significant other. Like get to a point where you feel comfortable talking to each other.
Hmm. So it almost sounds like really just making sure that there's no room for assumptions
Yes.
and, like you said,
Thank you.
misinterpretations.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's so incredibly important. I feel like one of the things I see so much in my couples, especially ones that have been together for a while, is that we kind of get comfortable
Right.
in that, like, oh, I know what they would say, or I know what they would think, or what they would do.
Yeah.
And it kind of doesn't leave space for the fact that we're evolving creatures.
Yes.
And the fact that, what they would have said when you first started dating may be very different than what they would say now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, this is at a much lower level than what you just said, but Amanda loved scary movies early on when we were dating.
Okay.
She had children. We had children, and that completely changed.
Oh,
She
wow.
cannot watch a scary movie. So I'm thinking in my head, wait, what happened here?
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's on a micro level. But like, yeah, people evolve.
But I think, I hear you saying it's a micro level, but it's those small details, right? That if we're operating, let's say you wanted to sit down and connect with her. And so you pop on a scary movie thinking, hey, we're going to get some, Netflix and chill time here. And then she's like, no, that's a no-go, completely shut down. You might be sitting there going, what did I miss?
And I did.
Is it me? Is it a me problem? Like, do we have issues in our marriage?
Yeah.
Where, like you said, with that kind of, like you said, that over communication, that even about those small details, it sounds like could be really beneficial.
Yeah, I won't try to put on a scary movie anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so now we know kind of what to do, how to make those connections maybe a little bit differently as they evolve.
Yeah,
That's,
you're absolutely right.
yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so I've got my shrimp in there. And so I just pour this guy in.
Yeah, half, or have you done half of this already?
It's like, 1/3, 2/3.
There you go. Yeah,
Okay.
you can pour the rest in, and then salt.
Okay, yeah, I got my salt. About how much
then-
salt am I doing? Am I doing to taste, or what do we think?
Yeah, a tablespoon, I would say, or maybe a little less.
Okay,
And then we mix it all up.
sounds
And
good.
you can eat it with tostadas, crackers, just straight out of a cup. It's really, like I said, a hybrid, so it's really flexible, versatile. You can add tomato juice, like V8. My mom always used V8.
Okay.
She doesn't like seafood, so the clam-based clamato, which I love, is my go-to if I do it like a shrimp cocktail.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can also, instead of mango, if you wanted to add avocado, that's another option.
Okay.
But yeah, it's very versatile.
Very cool. Well, I will make sure to mix this. Thank you so much for teaching us this recipe and for being willing to share your story. I know that it can be nerve-wracking and uncomfortable, so I really do appreciate you being willing to share that with us. I love getting a dad's perspective on this parenting journey because I think there's more normalization that needs to happen as far as even dads, because you guys have your own struggles and your own narratives and battles that you're working through that, frankly, I feel doesn't get enough time out in the world. We're making movements towards hearing about the mom stories, but not as many about the dad stories, and they're just as important.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And well, I appreciate you having me, and this was a great time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. We'll see you next time. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real-life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.